He didn't forget to lock the safe. He left it open on purpose. It was a trap, a final test for the only person who had managed to walk into his life without being crushed by suspicion. Julian Carter hadn't always been this silent, this cold. There was a time when his name held weight in elite business circles, carved into plaques, spoken in boardrooms, printed in Forbes headlines. He was the voice behind a shipping empire that once rivaled the giants. That voice, powerful and commanding, had now been buried beneath layers of pain, betrayal, and bitter lessons. Now, at only 40, silence was the only companion Julian trusted. Silence didn't cheat. Silence didn't beg. And above all, silence didn't lie. He lived inside a grand estate on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, a towering red brick mansion with marble floors, iron gates, and enough rooms to lose yourself in. 26 rooms, 16 hidden cameras, and 3 emergency alarms scattered through the walls. But no footsteps echoed except his own. Locals whispered stories. They called him paranoid, eccentric, dangerous. He had fired his gardener for asking too many questions. No one knew why. They didn't know his son had tried to have him declared mentally unfit, just to steal control of the family trust. They hadn't seen the empty bank account left behind by his daughter, the same girl who used to cling to him during thunderstorms. They hadn't read the forged treatment bills from his personal doctor, the man he once trusted like a brother. Julian had learned the hard way. People don't just lie. They wait, they watch, they scheme, all while smiling to your face. And once, when life was still warm, there was Grace, his wife, the only person who ever made this cold mansion feel like home. She loved wildflowers in the foyer. She filled the air with the smell of cinnamon bread. But cancer stole her slowly, and with her went the last bit of color in Julian's life. Since then, the house became a tomb. He never repainted, never moved her things, except the library. That room, her favorite, he kept spotless, untouched, sacred. Because even if he had stopped believing in people, he never stopped loving her. Julian's days followed a strict routine. Coffee at 6, oatmeal by 6:30, a short email check, followed by long hours of isolation. Staring at silent surveillance screens and inspecting every delivered apple like it contained poison. The man who once oversaw global trade routes now lived as a prisoner in a castle of paranoia. He hadn't spoken to another human in weeks, not willingly. His meals came from faceless delivery men. Housekeepers came and went, most lasting only a few days before quitting or being fired for some invisible offense. Then came the morning. He made a decision he hadn't imagined he'd ever make again. He needed help. His health was faltering. His body, once strong, now trembled with fatigue. He called a staffing agency in Atlanta and gave them a list of demands longer than most resumes. No criminal history, no social media, no interest in small talk, no curiosity, no questions. They sent him 3 profiles. He discarded the first 2 within seconds. The third caught his eye. Her name was Zarya Brooks, 27 years old, quiet, precise, disciplined. Her file said she was driven by purpose, not profit. He snorted when he read it. Words like that were usually meaningless, but something made him pause. On Tuesday morning, he watched through his security feed as a slim woman stepped off a faded city bus and walked straight to his front gate. No makeup, no jewelry, just a calm presence and eyes that didn't flinch. When he opened the door, she didn't force a smile or chatter nervously. She bowed her head slightly, waited for his permission to enter. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, she understood boundaries. Inside, he led her to the velvet couch in the cold, dust-drenched sitting room. Before he could even speak, Zarya asked a question. "The library. Should I dust the shelves only, or would you prefer the books arranged by height?" He froze. Most applicants asked about days off. Not one had ever asked something that detailed, that respectful. "Just dust," Julian replied, after a pause. "Everything stays exactly as it is." She nodded, made a note in a small notebook, and continued to ask precise, professional questions. She never once asked about his past, or his family, or his wealth. When she left, Julian found himself watching her silhouette walk down the path. It was the first time in years that someone had entered his home without triggering panic. But that didn't mean he trusted her. No one entered Julian Carter's life without being tested. The next morning, before Zarya arrived for her first day of work, Julian stood alone at the end of the East Wing, in front of a door no one else had ever entered. Behind it was his private safe room. Inside, stacks of cash, gold coins, jewelry boxes, old property deeds, and one folded piece of paper, the safe's code, left on the table like a careless mistake. He propped the heavy safe door slightly open. It was all staged. Temptation in its purest form. Back in the surveillance room, Julian sank into his leather chair and stared at the monitor, waiting. His heartbeat echoed louder than the hum of the security feeds. At exactly 8 a.m., Zarya entered the house. She went straight to work, dusting shelves, arranging pillows, scrubbing corners with quiet efficiency. For over an hour, she showed no signs of hesitation, not even a glance toward the valuables placed throughout the rooms. Then, the moment came. She walked down the East Wing. Julian leaned forward, watching the screen. She paused at the open door. She saw the money. She froze. Her hand trembled. He clenched his jaw. Certain she would step inside, but Zarya didn't move. Instead, she slowly pulled out her phone, backed into the hallway, and made a call. Julian read her lips. She was calling his secretary. She calmly reported the open safe and asked if she should lock it or wait for instructions. For the first time in years, Julian's eyes widened, not in fear, but surprise. Someone had just passed the test. Still, he didn't let his guard down. He reminded himself, people change under pressure. They pretend until the reward is big enough. Moments later, Zarya's phone buzzed again, a call from her mother. Her expression changed in an instant. Julian zoomed in on her face as her lips formed trembling words. Her mother's voice shook on the other end. The family grocery store. the only source of income, was going to be shut down unless they paid $38,000 by the end of the week. Zarya listened, silent tears in her eyes. She promised her mother she'd find a way. Then she hung up and stared back at the open safe. Zarya stood frozen in the hallway. The safe door remained ajar, silently daring her. A single step forward, one handful of cash, and her family's entire future could be saved. No one would notice a few bundles missing. Julian was a billionaire. She was just a housekeeper. Her heart thundered. The thought clawed at her mind. But then it stopped. Zarya closed her eyes and took a long, trembling breath. This wasn't her. Her parents had raised her on integrity, not survival at any cost. Slowly, she reached toward the small slip of paper on the table beside the safe. Then, instead of using the code to open it wider, she punched in a random sequence. The safe beeped. The door locked. Zarya folded the code slip, tucked it deep into her pocket, and collapsed into a nearby chair. And then she cried, not because she regretted the decision, but because it had taken everything in her to make it. In the surveillance room, Julian sat still, eyes wide, unmoving. He had seen people lie. He had seen people steal. But he had never seen someone lock temptation away with such pain and resolve. This woman, she didn't just pass the test. She shattered his entire belief about people. For 2 more hours, she didn't leave that hallway. She sat there, facing the locked safe like a guard, protecting something that wasn't hers. Julian watched every minute. He studied her posture, her calm, her tears, her resolve. For the first time in over a decade, he felt something stir in his chest. It wasn't just surprise. It wasn't just gratitude. It was trust. When the clock struck 6, Julian finally rose from the surveillance room. For the first time in years, his steps felt lighter. He descended the stairs slowly, intentionally, letting his footsteps echo so she'd hear him coming. Zarya stood as he entered the hallway, brushing away the traces of exhaustion on her face. But she couldn't hide the depth of what she'd just endured. Julian looked at her for a long, silent moment. "You're still here," he said softly. Zarya took a breath. "I noticed the safe was open. I called your secretary and stayed to make sure nothing happened." Julian nodded once. "I know." Her eyebrows furrowed. "You knew?" "I watched everything," he admitted. "There are cameras throughout the house. I saw how you handled it." A silence stretched between them. Zarya looked down, disappointed, maybe even betrayed. But when she looked up, her voice remained steady. "I understand. This is your home. You have the right to protect it." Julian stepped closer and reached into his jacket. He pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to her. Inside, a $50,000 check. "This is yours," he said. "You owned it." Zarya looked at the check, then back at him, and gently pushed it back into his hands. "I can't accept this," she said. "Doing what's right isn't something that should be rewarded with money. I did what anyone should have done." Julian was stunned. For years he believed everyone had a price. But here she was, turning down a small fortune with grace. He asked her quietly, "Why? Why are you like this?" Zarya hesitated, then finally shared the truth. "Years ago, My cousin needed a surgery we couldn't afford. An anonymous donor paid for it. We never knew who, but when I applied to work here, I recognized your name on the hospital's donor list. I knew it was you. That's why I came. To serve, not to take. Julian's heart stopped. He remembered that donation. He never thought he'd meet someone touched by it. And now, standing in front of him, was the very woman who reminded him of everything he used to believe in. He didn't say much after that. He simply walked to his desk, pulled out a leather-bound folder, and handed it to her. This is the Winters Trust Foundation. For years, I couldn't find anyone I trusted to run it. Until now. I want you to lead it. Zarya stared at him, overwhelmed. I'm just a housekeeper. No, he said. You're the only person who ever reminded me what it means to be human. She took the folder, her hands trembling, and in that moment, both of them realized something powerful. Family isn't built by blood. It's built by trust. Have you ever known someone who passed a test of integrity like this? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. If this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more real, powerful stories that restore your faith in humanity. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.